In the vast, untamed wilderness of rural Alaska, life is a constant battle against the elements. For Ethan Cole, a former firefighter haunted by the ghosts of his past, that battle was often fought alone in the quiet solitude of his remote cabin. He'd traded the roaring sirens for the whispering winds, seeking peace in the isolation. But peace was a fickle visitor, and the Alaskan sky was about to unleash a fury that would change his life forever. The rain began as a whisper, a gentle drumming on his tin roof. But soon it grew into a roar, a relentless torrent that turned creeks into raging rivers and valleys into vast, churning lakes. The world outside Ethan's window dissolved into a gray, watery chaos. The floodwaters rose with terrifying speed, swallowing the land and everything on it. One morning, as the deluge showed its first signs of retreat, Ethan surveyed the devastation from his porch. The landscape was scarred, littered with the debris of the storm. And then he saw it. A tiny, shivering form clinging desperately to a broken tree branch, half submerged in the swirling, muddy water. From a distance, it looked like a small puppy, lost and abandoned, a casualty of nature's wrath. Its fur was matted with mud, its body trembling uncontrollably. Without a second thought, Ethan's old instincts kicked in. He waded into the cold, treacherous water, his boots sinking into the soft, saturated earth. The current was still strong, pulling at his legs, but his focus was singular, the little creature fighting for its life. He reached the branch and gently scooped the animal into his arms. It was lighter than he expected, its small heart hammering against his hand. It let out a weak, pitiful sound, a whimper that tore at Ethan's own world-weary heart. Back in the warmth of his cabin, he carefully cleaned the mud from its fur, revealing a coat of mottled brown and gray. He wrapped it in his softest blanket and placed it by the crackling fireplace. As the creature slowly warmed up, its shivering subsided. It was injured with a nasty gash on its hind leg, but it was alive. In that moment, looking at the small, resilient life he'd saved from the churning water, Ethan felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. A purpose. He decided to call him River, a name born from the very disaster that had brought them together. In the days that followed, Ethan nursed River back to health. He cleaned and dressed the wound, fed him small bits of cooked meat, and talked to him in a low, soothing voice. And River, in return, began to recover. But his recovery was strange. It was unnaturally fast. The gash on his leg healed in record time, leaving barely a scar, and he was growing. Every week he seemed to get bigger, his frame filling out, his legs lengthening. His paws, which Ethan had initially thought were just large for a puppy, were becoming enormous, equipped with formidable, retractable claws. His movements were unlike any dog Ethan had ever known. He moved with a silent, fluid grace, a predatory stillness that was both beautiful and unsettling. River didn't bark. He never made the playful yips or demanding woofs of a puppy. Instead, he listened. He would sit for hours, his head cocked, his ears twitching, tuned into the subtle symphony of the forest. His eyes were the most captivating and perplexing thing about him. They weren't the trusting, goofy eyes of a domestic dog. They were a startling shade of amber, filled with a wild, ancient intelligence. When he looked at Ethan, it felt less like an animal looking at its owner, and more like an equal, a silent observer weighing and understanding everything. At night, River wouldn't sleep at the foot of Ethan's bed. Instead, he would take up a position at the cabin door, a silent, unmoving sentinel standing guard through the dark Alaskan nights. Ethan found himself growing deeply attached to this strange, silent companion. He'd lived with a heavy cloak of guilt and loneliness for years, the echoes of a past tragedy playing on a loop in his mind. The nightmares that had plagued his sleep for so long began to fade. The silence of his cabin was no longer empty. It was filled with River's quiet, reassuring presence. Walking through the woods with River padding silently beside him, Ethan started to feel a sense of peace he thought he'd lost forever. The crushing weight on his soul began to lift, piece by piece. River wasn't just an animal he had rescued. He was rescuing Ethan right back. The man and the mysterious creature had forged a bond in the quiet solitude of the wilderness, a friendship that transcended words. Summer arrived, painting the Alaskan landscape in vibrant shades of green and gold. But with the warm, dry weather came a new and even more terrifying threat: fire. It started with a single lightning strike. a spark in the tinder dry forest miles away. Fanned by strong winds, the spark grew into an inferno, a monstrous wall of flame that devoured everything in its path, racing through the valley with terrifying speed. The sky turned an apocalyptic orange, and a thick, choking smoke blanketed the land. Ash fell like black snow. Panic erupted, neighbors, and the few other scattered residents of the valley scrambled to gather what they could, their escape routes being cut off one by one. The roar of the fire was deafening, a hungry beast consuming the world. Ethan, the former firefighter, knew the signs. He knew the speed, the unpredictability, the sheer destructive power of a wildfire this size. Fear, cold and familiar, gripped him. But as he stood frozen on his porch, watching the flames crest the nearby ridge, he felt a nudge at his hand. It was River. The animal was calm, his intelligent amber eyes fixed not on the fire, but on a path through the dense, darkening woods. There was no panic in him, only a quiet, urgent certainty. While humans were running in chaos, River seemed to know exactly what to do. He nudged Ethan again, more forcefully this time, and then turned, looking back as if to say, "Follow me, now," trusting the animal that had become his shadow, his confidant, his savior. Ethan followed. River didn't lead him toward the main road, which was already becoming impassable. Instead, he plunged into the thick forest, away from the roaring blaze. Soon, they came across some of Ethan's neighbors, a family with 2 small children, disoriented and terrified, trapped by the smoke and flames. River didn't hesitate. With a low, commanding chuff, he herded the small group, guiding them all. He led them through winding game trails Ethan never knew existed, through thickets and across shallow streams that acted as natural fire breaks. He navigated the choking smoke and the falling embers with an instinct that defied logic. He was their compass, their beacon of hope in a world turned to hell. Hours later, exhausted, smoke-stained but alive, the small group emerged from the forest onto a high, rocky bluff overlooking the valley. They were safe. Below them, the fire raged, but it couldn't reach them here. As dawn broke, the sound of helicopters filled the air. Fire crews and emergency responders were finally arriving. An official, a wildlife biologist with the state, approached the weary group. He listened to their incredible story of survival, his eyes wide with amazement. Then his gaze fell upon River, who sat calmly beside Ethan, his fur singed, his body tired, but his gaze as steady as ever. The biologist stared for a long moment, a slow smile of disbelief spreading across his face. "Sir," he said to Ethan, his voice filled with awe, That's not a dog." He explained what Ethan had perhaps known in his heart all along. The oversized paws, the silent movement, the tufted ears, the intense knowing eyes. River was not a dog. He was a Canadian lynx. A wild, elusive predator. A ghost of the northern forests. An animal known for its fierce independence and solitary nature. He should have returned to the wild months ago. A creature like that doesn't stay with a human, but River had. In the aftermath, as the community began to assess the damage and start the long process of rebuilding, everyone knew the story of the man and the wild lynx who had saved them. Officials offered to relocate River to a wildlife sanctuary, a place where he could live with his own kind. It was the sensible thing to do, the right thing for a wild animal. With a heavy heart, Ethan agreed. He owed River his life, and if this was what was best for him, he would let him go. The day they came to take him, Ethan knelt down and looked into those familiar amber eyes one last time. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. But as the handlers approached with a crate, River did something unexpected. He backed away from them and pressed himself firmly against Ethan's leg. He let out a low growl, not at Ethan, but at the strangers. He looked up at the man who had saved him, his gaze unwavering. In that moment, the choice was clear. It wasn't Ethan's choice to make, and it wasn't the biologist's. The choice had already been made weeks ago in a flooded cabin by a warm fire. River was a wild lynx, yes, but he was home, against all odds, against all logic. The ghost of the forest chose to stay with the lonely man he had adopted as his own. And in the vast, wild heart of Alaska, the former firefighter and the wild lynx continued their lives together, 2 solitary souls who had found an unlikely family in the wake of disaster. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible tales from the wild. We'll see you in the next video.